This is a big subject in which I have 20 minutes. And so I'll stick to 20 minutes and I'll stop after 20 minutes. And I'll start from right now. Drucker was well known for asking key questions. And there is a question that has been bothering me, and probably a number of you for a long time, and that what is God saying to us here in the United States through this devastation that we've experienced from this AIG economic meltdown, which continues to move on in its implications, and it seems to be relentless. I don't know. I've been meditating on it, but I do know one piece of advice that we can take through this time, and it comes from Paul's writing to the Romans in chapter 12, verse 21, where he says, "Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And so my remarks will be dealing with that. Drucker did deal with that question, and I am prepared to do so. I have worked in the last 20 years or so, 25 years, in the intersection between the theology of work and management. And I have come to know the sparkling insights of theologians in the theology of work. And I've also come to know the pragmatics of management. So the context that I've worked is described best to me by J.I. Packer in the preface to his Knowing God, where he contrasts the work of the Balconeers with the work of the travelers. Now, I hope you're not offended if I call theologians Balconeers and executive travelers, and I'm somewhere in between because I interact with both. So having travelers are engaged in what I think Hermann Hesse best described as the polluted, vulgar, turbulent, strife-torn, money-grubbing world. And he concludes that our precepts are only fool's gold unless they can be put into practice by, in this case, executives. I've been influenced by a number of people in this room, also by Miroslav Volf in his book, Work in the Spirit, toward a theology of work, where he tries to contrast the role of the theologian with the role of the social scientist, the economist, the management professor. He says, "My main task will be to develop a theological framework for understanding human work and to elucidate the implicit ethical principles that should guide our efforts to assess and restructure the world of work. For lack of space and so on, I've chosen to refrain from making proposals about how these ethical principles should be translated into concrete policies. This complex task, I take it to be the creative assignment of the Christian economist and the social scientists, to be carried out in dialogue with theologians." I like that very much, and that's, I think, what we're doing here this weekend. So that leads me to my work with Peter Drucker, who for much of his life really tried to bridge the work of the executive with the norm, or what ought to be. And as best I know of the kingdom of God at work, that is what his norm was. Okay. I know that's a bold statement. And I often asked him how he could do so much consulting. And his answer was he tried to ease the transition. Drucker was quick to see the strengths in people, and one of his great lessons for us is to build on strengths while minimizing the impact of weaknesses. But he held a deep concern about the lust for power among executives of society's institutions. So that's the little area that I'd like to focus on, the huge area actually, but that little piece that I can focus on today. We know from Scripture that we know that the lust for power was one of the three weapons Satan used against Christ. In Matthew 4, verse 8, again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I'll give to you, he said, if you'll bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended to him. This third temptation is where Satan tempts Jesus by the lust for power. Worship me, and I'll give you enormous power, perhaps for a little while, over these kingdoms. A very distinguished management scholar who didn't know how wrong she was criticized Drucker by writing, there's no evil in the world Drucker shows us. To which Drucker responded, I started out teaching religion. I am only too aware that human beings perversely insist on behaving like human beings, and that this means pettiness and greed, vanity and lust for power, and yes, evil. After all, my first book was on the rise of Nazism. He knew it up front, close. The only thing that works, and admittedly with only indifferent success, is this great tradition of Western political thought that really goes back to Plato, or at least Aristotle, and is known as constitutionalism, limiting power by power, making sure that the units of power are kept small, containing the dangers of megalomania and the lust for power through countervailing forces, for example, through a strong board of directors or through a three-person top management team, and above all, by making objectives and performance the test, rather than personality and charisma. Drucker then goes on to say, what I've been trying to do is to first develop the norm, what ought to be, and then the constitutional principles that enable the well-meaning and virtuous to achieve it. And that will at least slow down and impede the corrupt and the vicious. That's what he was about. So he spent 70 years, long working life, right up to 2 weeks before his death, focusing on how to create societies that function. Talking to one of your distinguished theologians from Armenia, that is not easy. He was not trying to create an optimal society. He was trying to create one that was bearable and hopeful. And as you begin to look around the world at the number of failed states and the number of non-functioning societies, you have to say, blessed be the Lord for what we've experienced here in the heritage of the United States, that our founders have bequeathed to us. Drucker held a consistent set of philosophical assumptions, especially about those having to do with human nature. He believed in the capacity of human beings to manage complex organizations, designing organizations where people enjoy freedom by engaging in responsible behavior, and innovating so as to maintain continuity in the midst of change. That's what we're going through now. We're going through a period of massive discontinuity. He did believe that the best organizations develop their people both intellectually and morally. Yet he never lost sight of the realities of human nature, and this led him to believe that if there is to be true freedom in organizations, that the only basis for the freedom is the Christian concept of man's nature. Imperfect, weak, a sinner, yet created in the image of God. The lust for power was for Drucker the fundamental sin of human nature and the central problem of management that organizations had to counteract minimize, redirect, especially the lust for power and greed, while simultaneously appealing to the better angels of our nature by nurturing life-giving values which he thought were a result area, something to be sought as a result. So he proposed constitutionalism, the governing principles for running an organization, including federalism, the distribution of power in an organization between a central authority and its units, and a number of other tools to deal with the darker side of human nature and to promote effective governance. Again, slow down and impede. He made the transition between political federalism and corporate federalism. Actually, he was looking for what was in our Constitution when he was writing his doctoral dissertation, which he happened to write on Frederick Julius Stahl, a converted Jew who was an ecclesiastical parliamentician who was trying to develop a constitution for Germany during the 1850s, 1860s, unaware of what had been done in the United States, or perhaps aware that we were then just going through a civil war. So this is a part of the larger framework of management as a liberal art, and it is contained in our book, Drucker's Lost Art of Management. Here are just some of the principles he took from our founding fathers that he incorporated into his management. One, the founders' notion of the need for a virtuous society, Republican virtue, small r. It's directly connected to his norm for virtue or integrity in leadership. Integrity in leadership was what he called the touchstone, or the essence. That's the virtuous. The virtuous leader, one who assumes responsibility as a debt or as a duty, not as rank and privilege. It's interesting to note William Mill's subtitle of his recent book on President Abraham Lincoln, The Duty of a Statesman. A virtuous leader uses merit as consistent with political realities as the basis for making appointments and carrying out other executive functions. As we look back at our history, George Washington was almost the perfect leader. Our framers didn't know what to call him, a presider or a president. Long on service, proven executive capacity, strong character, even temperament, mindful of the failures of leadership in European history, and did not want to be a king. Lincoln was the perfect leader to sustain the Union and create a new birth of freedom by leading our nation through the Civil War, a bigger job perhaps than Washington himself had. Tolstoy explains the essence of Lincoln's greatness. Now, why was Lincoln so great? That he overshadows all other national heroes. He really was not a great general like Napoleon or Washington. He was not such a skillful statesman as Gladstone or Frederick the Great, but his supremacy expresses itself altogether in the peculiar moral power and greatness of his character. Principle 2, the legitimacy of power and authority. That was a question Drucker wrestled with all his life without a satisfactory solution, because basing his work on Stahl, who in turn based it on the Lutheran teachings, that the monarchy should be responsible to and the people subservient to. He was converting it to a secular view, and so we sought to make power and authority subservient to responsibility, and responsibility anchored in truth. He believed in objective truth. Values were not relative to Drucker. So the power exerted towards the colonies was widely viewed as illegitimate, especially taxation without representation. Legitimate power is power used in service of the basic mission of the organization and is exercised by way of responsibility and obligation to the people served. Principle 3, individual sovereignty. Liberate people for their good and for the good of society. Sovereignty in the U.S. Constitution is placed in the hands of the people, delegated to their elected representatives. This is exactly the concept behind Drucker's linkage of decentralization and management by objectives. Create freedom in organizations along with responsibility, leading to personal sovereignty and fulfillment of an organization's mission. Now, this is freedom in a weaker sense, and again, I'm quoting from Wolff. Freedom in a sense of being able to set and pursue one's own goals in work, not necessarily that are in line with what the rest of the organization is attempting, not necessarily freedom in a stronger sense of always being able to engage in whatever we want. That's license. Principle 4, the dangers of unchecked power. Absolute power, of course, corrupts absolutely, and here James Madison, we have to thank, who wrestled with this in the Federalist Papers, the need for separation of power in government and in other organizations to prevent concentration, no matter how virtuous they may be. Well, we may disagree, but I've meditated on Romans 8, but also you have to go through Romans 7. And I don't think we as Christians ever get through Romans 7. I haven't. So the dangers of unchecked power come from ourselves by curbing power through corporate federalism and by balancing, creating checks and balances between the central unit and the operating units, and by political pluralism, both within government, executive, legislative, and judicial, and outside of government, and the private, public, and social sectors. My time is running short, so I'm going to just summarize these basic ideas. Strive for virtue in leadership, strive for legitimacy of power, try to create sovereignty or freedom in the individual, but without license, freedom and responsibility, and separate power, check power with power. Drucker went on to show how this all worked out in corporations, and his life's work, major life's work in organizations, started with General Motors, and he shows it there. He demonstrates it there. The main vehicle that he used for management is management by objectives, all coming out of the same framework, coupled with self-control. It's the overall management philosophy that he proposed for resolving this tension between individual freedom, sovereignty, and authority, especially between executives of central units and operating units. So MBO with self-control is the best solution we have to advance individual freedom in organizations. And the empirical evidence on its effectiveness is astounding. We're collecting it right now. I have a doctoral student doing it. I'll close at this point by simply concluding that Drucker's life's work consists of tangible solutions for the management of corporations and other institutions of society to create societies that function. His concept of management as a liberal art, with its goal of creating functioning societies, has had enough success to give us hope and enough difficulty to make us wary of very easy solutions. Thank you.